in the first sentence of this story, you see these things echoed in the strangest places. And so these are stills that I took from Pinocchio. And this little cricket, so he's the still small voice, right? That's the thing that calls to you. It's your conscience in part. It's your intuition in part. And it's the thing that opens up the great book of the world, the great sacred book of the world. And that's what happens here, right? And the animators are at pains to show you that. It's a leather-bound book with gilt lettering. It's a valuable book. And it's something that's quiet that's showing it to you, right? You have to meditate, let's say. You have to be somewhere where the world isn't drowning you out in order to understand how to open this, to listen to that voice that tells you where you should go, what you should do next. And then what happens is that something beckons to you in the night. It's a star, right? It's something that transcends the horizon. It's glitters, it's brilliant, it's not day to day. It's something that's beyond you. It's something that represents a transcendent ideal and that makes it manifest to you if you're quiet enough to listen. And that's what you wish upon so strangely, right? And people do that. They wish upon a star. They teach their children that. And they don't know why. Well, what do you mean you wish upon a star? What in the world does that mean? It means you lift your eyes to the heavens and make a pact with the transcendent. And then what your heart's desire will come to you. That's what it means. And you think, well, that's not naive. It's the most sophisticated thing that you can know. And it's the birth of the hero, right? Because that's the nativity star, obviously. And this is where it takes place. It's just anywhere. And the person in it is just a carpenter and a toy maker. But that's pretty good. A carpenter, if you're a deceitful carpenter, then your house falls down. And if you're a toy maker, then you love children. That's a good start, you know. So Geppetto, who lives in this little, it's not a grand house. It's just an everyday house, but everything that's happening in it is good. And so that means it's a palace, because everything in it that's happening is good. There's a saying, and I don't remember where it comes from, that it's better to have bread and water in peace than a feast in conflict. And like, that's not a saying, that's just the starkest possible description of the truth, because there's nothing worse than eating a grand meal with people you hate and despise that are at each other's throats. It's much better to have bread and water in peace. It's just clear-headed analysis of the structure of the world to say things like that. And so the magical transformation can happen in the most mundane of places. And the reason for that is that the mundane nature of places is an illusion, because every place is the potential birthplace of the kingdom of God. That's the case. And so Geppetto, he's a good guy. He has a kitten, you know, the kitten likes him. He makes puppets, and he's a humble person. And he knows that compared to the ideal that he's attempting to subscribe to, that he's not abased before it or anything like that. He's not despicable in relationship to it. But the reason he's on his knees is because the thing he's pointing at is above him. You know, it wouldn't be the right aim if it wasn't above him. And so the fact that he's on his knees, so to speak, is only an indication that his aim is proper, because you should be on your knees to something that you actually admire. And if you don't feel like being on your knees in front of it, then perhaps you don't actually admire it. And then that means you haven't got the stage set properly. It should be something that fills you with awe. Your aim should be at something that fills you with awe. Because why do something else? Well, perhaps because it's easy, and perhaps because it's malevolent, and all of those things. But those are no answer to the problems that beset you. They just make things worse, and that's clear. And so then Geppetto, having made his pact, his covenant, just like Abraham, he falls into a dream, right? He falls into a dream, and the rest of the movie actually takes place in a dream. And it's a dream, it's the dream within which transformation takes place. And that's laid out, at least in part. Time stops in the Pinocchio story, and everything happens to Pinocchio in some sense in a land that's outside of normal time, and that's the infinite archetypal space, and that's a real place. That's a real place. The infinite and the finite coexist, and most of the time we're in the place of the finite, but that doesn't mean that the place of the infinite doesn't exist. It just means that we can't get access to it. We just get intimations of it from time to time. You know, when things are going perfectly well for you, on those rare occasions where everything comes together, for the brief moment you inhabit that divine place and you have some sense of what your life could be like if you organized it from the smallest element to the largest element. And that's a place that you can inhabit, if not forever, in a manner that at least felt like forever. Well, because of Geppetto's decision, the transcendent manifests itself. It takes the form of the blue fairy. Here, that's the positive element of nature, right? So we could say, well, nature, it's not so clear that she's on your side, right? She's the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland who runs around screaming when you go down the rabbit hole. Who runs around screaming, off with their heads, and who says, in my kingdom, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. That's Mother Nature. But then we might say, well, how do we know that Mother Nature's attitude towards you isn't negative because your attitude towards things isn't proper? And that's what this film attempts to indicate. The idea is that if you aim properly, then nature aligns itself behind you. Now, it also arrays itself in front of you, perhaps even as an antagonist, but the power that it provides you with from within might be sufficient to overcome it from without. And I think that the clinical evidence is clear about that. Because one of the things that we do know is that if you take people who are confronting terrible things and shrinking from them, and you teach them how to structure their behavior so that they can advance with courage, everything works better for them. Their fears decrease and their character grows. And so there might be enough of nature within us to help us withstand the nature that's outside of us. And it depends, at least to some degree, on how it is that we orient ourselves in the world, to some unknowable degree. Now, Geppetto wants an autonomous individual as a son. And that's also something that makes him a great person, because autonomous individuals have their own will. And if you're a tyrant, it's the last thing that you're going to want. And if you're the tyrant who's jealous of his son, it's even more so the last thing you're ever going to want. And so to aim high and to want the development of the autonomous individual are the same thing. And I would say that's the core story in some sense of Western culture, is that to aim high and to develop the autonomous individual are the same thing. And that's what happens in Pinocchio. That's what happens in the story of Abraham. And the transformation takes place, the magical transformation. And in the Pinocchio story, one of the things that's so interesting about it, and this is part of its mythological substructure, from the scientific perspective, there's only two determining forces with regards to the destiny of the individual. There's nature, deterministic, and culture, deterministic. And then scholars wrangle about which of those is the greater force. But in mythological stories, there's always a third element. And that third element is something like autonomous consciousness. And there's no place for autonomous consciousness in the deterministic story of nature and culture. But we all act as if autonomous consciousness is the primary reality. And the biblical stories are predicated on the idea that autonomous consciousness is what gives rise to the world. And I don't think that we're in a position to presume that that is necessarily in error. And so what that means is to aim high and to develop the autonomous individual is simultaneously the decision to formulate an allegiance with the conscious power that brings being into existence. And that all takes place inside this little puppet. And then he has his adventures, right? He's still half jackass and half deceptive, but he's still, despite that, and despite all the errors, he has the capacity to move forward and to transform himself into something that can be properly described as a true son of God. And that's the right aim.